Understanding Hearing Loss for Law Enforcement Officials. The Minnesota Department of Human Services Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division has developed the following content to provide on-demand training that builds your understanding of people who are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing. This series includes 5 topics and 1 community panel. You may start with any of these videos and watch them as many times as you like. We also encourage you to share links to these videos with your family, friends, colleagues, and partners. This video focuses on understanding hearing loss for law enforcement officials.
Hearing loss is very common, and most people know or work with someone who doesn't hear well. Roughly 20% of people in America have a hearing loss, or 1 out of every 5 people. Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, requires state and local government entities, including law enforcement agencies, to communicate effectively with people who have disabilities. Law enforcement agencies must be able to communicate just as effectively with people who have hearing loss as they do with people who do not have hearing loss. Every person experiences their hearing loss differently. 2 people may have the same hearing loss, but they may identify and communicate very differently. They may wear hearing aids, lip read, use sign language, write back and forth, or have other ways they communicate. It is important to keep in mind that not everyone uses all of these communication tools. What works for one person may not work for another person. Make no assumptions about the person, their hearing loss, and how it impacts or does not impact them. People who have hearing loss have different communication preferences based on their degree of hearing loss, when they lost all or part of their hearing, and how well they can see. Culturally deaf people consider themselves a culture and linguistic minority who use ASL as their primary language. They may use spoken or written English as a second or even third language. A culturally deaf person may have a hearing aid or some residual hearing, but they are usually not able to clearly understand spoken language. They may not use their own voices to speak because people who do not know them may not understand them. The effectiveness of gesturing and writing may depend on the person, and you may need a professional sign language interpreter to effectively communicate. You are much more likely to encounter or work with people who are hard of hearing. People become hard of hearing with age, noise exposure, or due to medical reasons. A person who is hard of hearing may not even realize how much their hearing loss impacts communication. They may or may not have hearing aids or other assistive listening devices. Many people who are hard of hearing do not use sign language. They may rely partially or entirely on lip reading and written communication. Don't be fooled into thinking lip reading is perfect. Even a good lip reader could be missing out on 70% of the words being used because they are not easily visible on the lips. Using written communication is a more complete and effective way to convey your message. A third group of people with hearing loss is a much smaller share of the population. These are people who have some degree of both vision and hearing loss. Effective communication is based on individual needs in which sense is stronger at any given moment. Some communication techniques include tactile sign language, if they are a sign language user, spoken language, use of assistive listening devices, communication access real time translation or CART, captioning, braille and text magnification devices. If written communication is used, make sure to pay attention to the font size and color, background colors, and other visual elements of written communication so you can communicate effectively with the person. For more information about hearing loss and how it impacts communication in each population, you may watch the Hearing Loss Basics training module. Law enforcement entities must provide auxiliary aids and services when they are needed to communicate effectively with people who have hearing loss and other communication disabilities. The key to communicating effectively is to consider the nature, length, complexity, and context of the communication and how the person normally communicates. The ADA applies whether the person with hearing loss is the subject, victim, informant, or witness, or that person's companion. This includes a parent, spouse, adult child, or other individual. Title II of the ADA requires you to consider the person with a disability when determining which reasonable accommodation is appropriate. For example, if a deaf person requires an ASL interpreter, primary consideration must be given to that request rather than offering another accommodation that may be less effective. If you decide another accommodation will be used, you must be able to prove that the accommodation you are choosing will be equally effective as the accommodation the person requested.
Communication access tools. People with hearing loss have the right to request reasonable accommodations to ensure effective communications. These are also called auxiliary aids and services. Law enforcement agencies are legally obligated to provide and pay for the accommodation. Here are some common auxiliary aids and services. Qualified interpreting services. According to the ADA, a qualified interpreter means someone who is able to interpret effectively, accurately, and impartially. This includes both understanding what the person using ASL is saying and conveying information from law enforcement back to that person. A qualified interpreter is also able to convey necessary specialized vocabulary. A qualified interpreter should be certified by a national organization such as the NAD, the National Association of the Deaf, or RID, Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. It is also important to check the interpreter's experience interpreting in legal or law enforcement settings. There are different types of interpreters who have special training to support unique communication needs. In addition to ASL interpreters, there are certified deaf interpreters, oral interpreters, and tactile or close vision interpreters who are trained to communicate with deaf-blind individuals. Communication Access Real-Time Translation, or CART, captioning services can be provided either in person or remotely. CART uses the same technology used for court reporting. The captioner listens to what is being said and types out every word on their device. This information is then broadcast onto a screen. This can be a mobile device, a laptop, a television screen, a monitor, or even projected onto a wall depending on the person's preference. Note writing is another option. This is exactly what it sounds like. The police officer and the person with hearing loss write back and forth during the interaction. Electronic writing, traditional paper and pen, speech-to-text app, or a printed script of a stock speech are all examples of note writing. There are also devices and apps designed specifically for communicating back and forth with people who have hearing loss. Devices like the Ubi Duo can aid in communication when needed. Contact DHHSD for ideas, suggestions, and vendors that provide these products. Assistive listening devices, ALDs. We recommend having ALDs, such personal amplification devices, on hand in case a person with hearing loss comes into your agency. This can be used on request or if a person is struggling to communicate or you think they may not be hearing you correctly.
Here are some common situations and advice for handling communication accommodations if the person you're interacting has a hearing loss. Traffic stops or routine interactions. When communicating during more basic routine interactions, accommodating a hearing loss may be more simple. For example, it may be effective to write back and forth with the person as you communicate. You could also try using a speech-to-text app on your mobile device. This would allow you to continue speaking while the app captions what you've said. The person with the hearing loss can read and respond to the information. Gestures may also be effective. For example, showing the outline of a driver's license while saying the words driver's license, so the person can see both the shape of what you're asking for as well as lip read, and this helps fill in the context that may be missing. Remember that people who communicate in ASL will use hand gestures. This should not be construed as aggression or a sign of mental stress. Some people may have traffic and/or communication cards in their vehicles that they may show you. These cards typically indicate that they have a hearing loss and may give information on how to communicate. They may also have simple images for you to point to indicate what the information is you need from them. The HHSD has produced traffic and communication cards for individuals to use when interacting with law enforcement, and law enforcement agencies may request these cards to have on hand in case they encounter someone with a hearing loss.
Parole probation meetings. Meetings that are longer or more intense, such as parole or probation meetings, typically require a more complex accommodation. It is required by law, and it is best practice to honor the accommodations request of the person with hearing loss. Individuals who communicate in ASL are entitled to have access to a qualified interpreter. Individuals with hearing loss who do not know ASL may benefit from CART, ALDs, or speech-to-text apps.
Telecommunications for any kind of routine calls. If you work with someone who has a hearing loss and doesn't yet have an accessible telephone, you can refer them to Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services and the Telephone Equipment Distribution Program, or TED. This program provides free telecommunications equipment to people who are eligible. It is also increasingly common for people who already have a diagnosed hearing loss or who are culturally deaf to use devices like a video phone, caption phones, or a video messaging application such as FaceTime or Zoom or Skype. A person with a hearing loss who is in custody or in jail is entitled to accessible telecommunications. Caption phone and video phone software can be downloaded onto laptops or tablets that inmates can use when communicating outside of the jail or prison setting. They should have equal access to telecommunication equipment, the same as any hearing inmate. Contact Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services for vendor lists of companies that provide video phone and caption phone services. To access the other videos we offer, please return to the home page for our training. For more information and assistance, go to mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing.
Copyright 2022, State of Minnesota, Department of Human Services. Produced by Minnesota Department of Human Services, Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division. 444 Lafayette Road, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55155. Voice or preferred relay service, 800-657-3663. Video phone, 651-964-1514. Website, mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing. The Minnesota Department of Human Services, DHS, prohibits discrimination in its public services because of race, color, creed, religion, political beliefs, national origin, sex, public assistance status, marital status, age, sexual orientation, or disability. Direct discrimination complaints to DHS Civil Rights Coordinator at dhs.info@state.mn.us or 651-431-2000. People with disabilities may request reasonable modifications to receive DHS services by contacting its Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator at dhs_ada@state.mn.us or 651-431-3040.